So, first thing, welcome everyone to this year's Distinguished Koten Lecture, sponsored by the Planck Center for Leadership in Public Relations. The Koten Lecture is named for a legend in public relations, a guy named Jack Koten. Among many other things, he was a founding director of the Planck Center here. He was also a co-founder of the Arthur Page Society. This morning, we're going to hear from another legend in public relations, Jon Iwata. And as Bill just mentioned, I worked at IBM. Jon has recently retired from IBM. I worked for Jon for about 20 years. We had dinner last night with a couple of members of the faculty, and I was telling him I had worked out this introduction that I was really happy with. And then I delivered it to myself, practicing it, and I realized there might have been some confusion between whether I was just introducing the Koten lecture or delivering the whole thing myself. It turns out there is a lot you can say about a career that is broadly regarded as the most accomplished ever in corporate communications. So just brief, I'm going to make a couple of points. In leadership conversations, the word vision gets thrown around a lot. And it turns out precious few people ever really have a vision. Jon Iwata is one of the exceptions, and you're going to see what I mean by that in just a second. Second point, Jon retired just this January from IBM. He was the company's first chief brand officer, a new title, and he also ran global communications. So what's running global communications? Global communications at IBM is all of public relations, all workforce communications, and that's a workforce of 400,000 people in 170 countries. Think about that. All marketing, all advertising for an $80 billion enterprise, all the corporate citizenship work. And Jon led the strategic positioning of IBM, which is, by any measure, one of the world's most admired and most valuable brands. Okay. Just this week, he has started a new position as the executive in residence in the Yale University School of Management. School of Management, not School of Communications. School of Management, which tells you a lot in itself about Jon's reputation and how he is regarded in industry and in business, far beyond impact in a strictly traditional communications context. So with that, please join me in welcoming our Koten lecturer, Jon Iwata.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I wish my whole family were here to hear that. I feel like I'm at my own eulogy in advance. So that's nice. Please, if you're available later for that. It's a real privilege for me to be here. It's my second time in Alabama. My first time was when the IBM shareholder meeting came to Huntsville. IBM did a lot of work during the moon missions, and we're very proud to bring the shareholder meeting to Huntsville some years ago. And it's been great to be here with you today. If you see me hobbling around here, I wish I had a better story, like I saved a baby carriage on Fifth Avenue or did some rock climbing. I was trying to hit a 5-iron 190 yards. So, look, I'm going to talk a lot about the future. And by the way, public relations will be the core. You call that communications or public affairs. But frankly, you could replace public relations with the term marketing. You could replace it with the term corporate citizenship or CSR. What it has in common, and I think this is a premise that I've come to really believe about this work that you're studying and applying, and I have applied my entire professional life. Ultimately, it's about human behavior. It is not about messaging. It is not even about perception and opinion. All of those things are good. They're hard to do, to influence, to affect. You can never control it. It's hard to manage it. But they're in service, ultimately, of somebody, some person, making a decision to do something or not to do something, to work for your company, to invest in your company, to allow your company to operate as a neighbor, to buy your company's products, to support your company's policies, to not act against your company's policies. That's behavior. And you don't have to study it, because we're all human beings here. You know that what causes you to behave, many things go into that, many drivers. Now, this isn't, you're not studying psychology, but ultimately the work of communications, how we come to understand something, how we come to believe something, how we come to act upon those beliefs, or in some cases, we don't act upon something even if we believe it, which happens. We could talk about that if you want to. That is the core of what we do. Therefore, the future of that, the humans aren't changing that much. We'd like to talk about change, and I certainly will today with you. But what doesn't change? Well, lots won't change. One is the mechanisms of behavior. But let me start with a few things that have defined public relations and marketing and these other related fields for a very long time, Like what you're studying, if you went to work for an IBM or a political party or an NGO or the university here or a healthcare system, and you were in marketing or you're in public relations, what are the things you would be expected to do? And frankly, you would have been expected to do them 100 years ago. Well, here's one, segmentation. Have any of you studied segmentation models? Raise your hand if you have. You haven't, okay. You have. Okay, you have. The concept, though, is very, very simple. You have a population. You're trying to identify people within that population who are relevant to you, people who will buy your product or come to work for you or go to your university. And how are you going to identify them? Well, you come up with segmentation models and you apply them. You can segment a country. You can segment a city. You can segment this room. Let's try it right now. Okay, so everybody stand up. Right. So, you're a population, and I'm trying to say, I'm trying to narrow the people I'm trying to reach. How am I going to do that? Well, you're all here at the University of Alabama. You're being subject to this lecture, but that's not specific enough. So let's try some segmentation models. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. As long as you can answer yes, keep standing. But if I ask you a question and the answer does not apply to you, the answer is no in your case, have a seat, okay? All right, so let's start. So we start with the population. You see who you are here. First, you have at least one sibling. If you don't, have a seat. Okay. So just so we understand how this works, if you're still standing, you have at least one sibling. Good, good, good. Number two, you have traveled outside of the United States for any reason. Oh, world travelers, very, very good. Number three, you belong to a fraternity or a sorority. Number four, you have at least one credit card, not in your name, but it's your own account. Not your parents' account, it's your own account. You have aha, you're like my kids. Okay, all right, so you have your own credit card account in your own name. Number five, you wear or use glasses or contact lenses. And number six, you identify yourself as a female. Okay, so we've got here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, call it 14 still standing out of room. Thank you very much. Now, my point here is the 14 of you, because you have all those things in common, you must be identical, right? You must be the same person, the same people, in your interests, in your passions, in what you want to do, what you're looking for, the decisions you'll make. And the answer, of course, is no. You have those things in common, but you are unique individuals. But if you're a business or a political party or an NGO or the University of Alabama or a healthcare system, we're trying to reach a population, what more could we do than to use segmentation models of 18 to 24-year-olds, household incomes of $100,000, your job title, your zip code, your gender. You like golf, you like skiing, you all like football. You all like football. It's amazing. Anyway, we'll talk about it later. The world has worked that way. The world has worked that way. But you know, that's a rather blunt instrument, isn't it? Because those businesses, those institutions are creating these models and imposing them on this population, the same way I did that in about 1 minute. I'm telling you who you are. Well, what's the alternative? What else could we do? We'll talk about that. Because for the first time in human history, institutions and businesses can not only tell you who you are telling us who you are every minute of every day, whether you know it or not. We should have a discussion about that too. You are declaring your uniqueness. You are declaring not only who you are, you're declaring what you're doing at this moment, what you want to do, where you want to go, what you're looking for. You might even be sharing where you physically are and where you might physically be. This is unheard of. This is unprecedented. We've never had this ability as businesses, as political parties, as, to understand you not as a segment, not as a demographic slice, but as a unique individual. Never in human history. So I'll tell you the punchline up front. You cannot be a practitioner of public relations or a marketer or a fundraiser or a CSR person until you master the new mechanisms of this. Never been done before. Now, the second thing that's always been true is this quote from Edward L. Bernays. How many of you read anything or even heard of this man? Okay, you definitely have. So some regard him as the, quote, father of public relations. Look at the date. This is 1928. He wrote a book called Propaganda. It wasn't a pejorative then. This quote is truth. I boiled this down to the following. The few influence the many. Is that still true today? Do the few influence the many? Yeah. Who would you say are among the few who influence the many? What kinds of people would be in the few, depending on what you're trying to do? Whether you're buying something or going somewhere or choosing what school to go to, whatever it is. Who would you include in the few?
Celebrities.
Celebrities, excellent. Who else would be in the few? Politicians, right. What else?
Teachers.
Possibly teachers. Yes, absolutely.
Influencers.
Okay, very good. So we had dinner last night, lovely dinner. I got to the dessert course. There was an item on the dessert course. All of it looked really good and bad for you. All of it looked bad for you. All of it was bad for you. There was an item on the menu called the oatmeal cream pie. Oatmeal cream pie. And I'm like, well, I'm not from around here. What is an oatmeal cream pie? And somebody said, oh, rumor has it that's a favorite of your football coach. And I'm not even going to attempt to say his name. I'm going to blow it. Save it. Have you heard this before, that he likes this oatmeal cream pie? So guess what some people at the table did? They ordered it. Okay. That's an influential person determining a choice of dessert. Edward L. Bernays observed this. The few influence the many. But in the same way that, and that's 100 years old. You say, well, that's not going to change. True. Segmentation isn't going to change. This is not going to change. The few will always influence the many. But what's new here, as we'll see, and as you know, the many influence many more. The many influence many more. So if you're frozen in time like a mosquito in amber, and you're at IBM or you're at whoever else you're going to work for, and you say, I got to map out the influencers, because if I can get to them, I'm going to get to the population. Good, do that. But if that's all you know how to do, which is not easy to do, by the way, because the influencers are changing, you're not doing your full job. And that's new. How do we unlock the mechanisms of the many who have great influence over the many more? Two new things. Let's not tell you who you are. Let's try to understand who you say you are, what you're looking for, what you're doing, and so forth. And secondly, let's really understand the power of the masses influencing the masses. And that's new. Now, part of this is what I call, well, this is that phenomenon of the few influencing the many. Now, when I sat in your seats at San Jose State University out in California 100 years ago, the world operated this way. You know, the few included media. The few included not just the big major media, but these. I mean, look at these magazines and the topics. By the way, I built this chart before I knew I was coming here. I built this chart last year. I did not make that up. You know, Alabama agriculture or bass angler and so forth. But why do magazines like that get created? Specific audience. Because if we segmented the population, there were people who were interested in Alabama agriculture or bass fishing, right? Well, again, go back to how it used to work. If I'm trying to sell a fishing rod, how am I going to reach these people? How do I even know who's interested in bass fishing? Well, Bass Angler has a subscription list. Presumably you subscribe to it because you're interested in bass fishing. I got it. I'll do two things. I'm going to go try to influence the reporter. One department tries to influence the reporter at Bass Angler to write a nice story about my fishing rod. And then the advertising colleague is going to go place an ad in Bass Angler magazine, because you as a subscriber are going to go read the article written by a reporter with a nice quote saying nice things about my fishing rod, and right next to that or somewhere else in the magazine there's going to be an ad, right? You say, well, that's how the world, yeah, that's how the world worked because nothing else was available. And it didn't matter if it was print or electronic or digital or broadcast. My point here is not, oh, everything's dead that's printed and everything's now digital. My point is much more subtle and profound. It doesn't matter if it's face-to-face, digital, print. It's the mechanism. The mechanism is what's different here, that we're no longer dependent upon the few to reach the many. Still the case, diminishing, but still the case. Not trying to say that's not true anymore. It's not enough. Now, so as I was leaving IBM, one of the last things I did with the communications team was to say we have to become a social first organization, and that's on the way to becoming something else, which I'll get to in a second. Well, what's a social first communications team or organization or function? Social first. So I had to define it, because everybody thought, oh, a social first means we're all on Instagram, or we're all on Snapchat, or we're running ads on Facebook or something. Well, yes and no. Let's decompose what social first means. And these are the same charts I used in addressing my worldwide organization. So we're going to move this way, team. Let's start with this. This is not going to surprise you. These figures are probably already out of date. They're only going to get larger. So one is, it is a reality that people are on social platforms. And I've left out ones that you're probably already using that I'm aware of. But let's just accept the fact that social platforms are used by a significant portion of the human family, which itself is profound. The question is, so what? And believe me, a lot of my colleagues of a certain vintage look at that and say, yeah, that's like the other chart. That's like the New York Times and Bass Angler magazine and NPR. That's the new NPR. That's the New York Times. We got to run ads there, and we got to find out who the influencers are on Twitter. We got to get to them. We got to treat the blogger like we treated the reporter at the New York Times. This is not new. There was radio and there was television, and oh, that's so comforting. We can huddle for warmth that we don't have to change. It's not the case. Yes, run your ad on Facebook. Reach the blogger. Influence the tweeter, but it's not enough. Why? Well, let's keep going. So one, the people are there. Two, content. Now this is really important. If I were to rebuild the chart, I looked at it this morning again, I would have integrated the every 60 seconds on the right side so you don't miss it. Those numbers on the right happen every 60 seconds. This is not produced by IBM and Spotify and the Republican Party. This is You. These are individuals who now have, you know what? They have a printing press, like the New York Times. They have a broadcast studio, like NPR and CNN. They are producing content. You'd say, I already know that. Well, this is why it matters, because other people are not just looking at that content, they're engaging with it. How do you define engagement? Well, lots of different ways here. But notice this. These are not eyeballs like, oh, I've got 1,000 people following me on Twitter, and I tweeted something out, so that must be 1,000 impressions, like the old days of column inches. No. Now we can quantify that somebody not only saw that video or read that tweet, they did something. They liked it or they repinned it or whatever. They did something, which is an indication of their, call it whatever you want, their interest in it or level of engagement. So one, you got all these people, big portion of the human family on these platforms. Two, they're not just sitting there waiting to be targeted by our programmatic media machines. They're producing content. Their networks of followers, their friends, whomever, are engaging that content, which can be quantified with data, through data. If I were talking to my colleagues of a certain vintage, they'd say, I'm still not impressed that we have to change anything. This still sounds to me like Bass Angler Magazine or NPR, right? These are audiences to whom we inflict messages. No. Why? Because what the masses, the content the masses share, what they post, what they recommend, what they don't recommend, what they attack, what they adore, is highly credible. More credible than having it come from an IBM or a politician or a leader or an institution. It's more credible. Now it gets the attention of my colleagues and the CEOs of the world, because credibility drives behavior. It's one thing to hear something, or to, I saw the IBM ad, but am I going to go buy a Watson as a result of seeing a spot? Bob Dylan thing was cute, but it's not going to drive my behavior necessarily. This is very, very powerful. Companies are trying to marshal the forces of content that's credible, that's designed to be shared, not just designed to be consumed. Big difference. The General Electric, this is typical of what's happening in many companies today. You'll hear or that companies are becoming, quote, publishers. They're hiring videographers and writers and editors in-house to produce content. Oh, that's not advertising? No, it's not advertising. It's stuff like this. A colleague of mine at Chevron, big energy company, fighting this huge multi-billion-dollar lawsuit, people accusing Chevron of messing up a part of the Amazon forest. The old world, we got to tell our story to reporters. Reporters are gatekeepers. Yeah, maybe I believe you, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll put your quote in, maybe not. We crawl to reporters, begging them to please listen to our story and believe us. His view is, forget the reporters. Forget the lawyers. Let's go direct because we can. We have a printing press. We have a broadcast studio ourselves. So he created this thing called the Amazon Post. And not only are these articles, lest you think these are press releases, he's taking the exhibits from the lawyers, the actual evidence that's being presented in court, and putting it up on Amazon Post for the world to judge for themselves. The actual evidence, the videos, the documents, say, let the world judge for themselves whether we're guilty or not. Brave. Lowe's.
At the most fundamental level,
IBM.
Quantum computing has become one of the leading applications of quantum physics. Quantum computers have the potential to solve some of the world's most complex problems that are beyond the reach of even today's most powerful supercomputers. Quantum computers are not going to replace classical computers, but their radically different way of operating enables them to perform.
The low stuff is more fun than the IBM stuff, okay, but you know. Retiling your bathroom is not the same thing as quantum computing. My point there is those examples, whether it's GE or Chevron or Lowe's or IBM here, did not come out of the marketing departments. Those came out of the communications departments, public relations departments. Because in the past, they'd say, well, we have media relations and we have employee communications and so forth. And now everyone's saying, well, that's good, but we need something else. We need a way to go direct to the many who can influence the many more, not just the few. So literally, you take a snapshot of organization charts at places like IBM and GE and some of the other companies, and you'll see, beginning, the department structures are the media relations people dealing with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journals are getting smaller and smaller, and these original content capabilities, these teams are becoming huge. And the public relations agencies, in fact, that term somehow doesn't fit any longer because a lot of them are becoming, they look like media companies because of this very phenomenon. Using your own employees. Now, this is an old chestnut here that your employee is your best brand ambassador. That's true, but look at the numbers here. You have the company tweet something or post something, or you have an employee of the company do it in his or her social network. Look at the engagement levels. They cannot be compared. And the upper right one is, I think, quite interesting. Lest you think that the people who like IBM are the same people who follow me, there's only an 8% overlap on average between the network of people who are following employees and the network of people who are following a brand or an institution. Very, very different. Activating that, though, isn't just something you can assume. You actually have to, manage that. This is the Edelman Trust Survey. Look at the upper right, that's the key. A trusted source of information on a variety of topics along the bottom there. In every case, what's the most trusted source? It's the employee of your company. It's not the CEO. It's not the spokesperson, certainly. It's the employee. Trumps all these others. So look, we have a huge employee population at IBM, but if you had a 50 employee population, the principle still applies here, is what they say has a lot more credibility than what we say formally. So in the case of IBM, we have about 380,000 employees, massive social footprint. That's the IBM population. Big alumni group, Mark's one of them. And we are deliberately activating this network, the employee network, to be advocates. We don't ghostwrite for them. We don't tell them what to tweet, post, blog. We enable them to be well informed about the company. We enable them to ask questions about our policies. We let them know in advance, in some cases, of things we're going to announce to the world. And we create these assets, some of which you saw, and say, look, it's up to you. We're not asking you to do it. We're not going to reward you for doing it. But if you care about your company and you're interested in this topic, quantum computing, our financial results, you name it, here you go. Activating that massive reach. So one, the ability to create content directly, not being reliant any longer on the fourth estate, to go directly with content. Two, the people, your own employees, and the people who affiliate with your, your stadium holds how many people? 104,000 people, something like that? How many students do you have? Enrolled students today? Okay. Well, then why don't you build a 37,000 seat stadium? Right. See, it's the same phenomenon, right? You have people who are passionate about this institution for whatever reason. Well, companies are no different. You will, I trust, always be a passionate alum of your institution. Do you think they're going to let you just not, you think they're going to tap into that in some way? You know they are. You know they are. Well, that's going to extend out into the digital realm too. And it's a good strategic thing to do. Third point here is spend. This is not a point about advertising. This is not about buying the message. Let me give you an example. So a classic, it could have been done 50 years ago. IBM is announcing some breakthrough in its research lab. So the communications team is told, we're putting out this news in a month, write a nice press release, pitch it to the New York Times reporter who's interested in this breakthrough. And so they do that. Understand the breakthrough, go to the New York Times, science writer, embargo the news. Reporter says, I'm interested, I'm going to write. Writes this lovely story, it's published. High fives in the public relations department that morning. So I said, wow, great story, classic hit. Well, how many people might it reach? Well, we don't know, but there are 1.83 million digital subscribers in the New York Times. I'm like, that's great, that's great. But could we do better than 1.83 million subscribers? And they're like, what are you talking about? We're going out to lunch and celebrate. Like, well, let's go ask some people who know how this mechanism works here. Long story short, with a paltry sum of money, we did a sponsored post and generated an additional, almost 2 million additional views on social platforms, and generating, call it 3.8 million impressions from that initial one. And here's what we don't know, but we should know. So this is very easy, right? New York Times publishes a great story. We then say, through a little bit of money to Facebook and other platforms, can you ensure that this story is seen in the news feeds of people who might find it of interest? This is the targeting part of it. And they said, sure, easy. So if you're watching your news feed that day, and for whatever the algorithm said, you'd say, oh, there's a very interesting New York Times story here. Here's what we don't know. Did you retweet that? Did you share that with your network? Because for all we know, but I know this, that 3.76 million is 5 million. It's 8 million. It's 15 million. Why? Because the few influence some, the New York Times, but the many, they influence many more. And I'm very excited, of course I'm retired now, so I'm excited for my colleagues. When they get good enough to figure this out, they'll see it. They'll see it in real time. They'll see it through the data. They'll say, there was a hit from the New York Times, we spent a small amount of money with targeted posts, and we're watching through the data the millions of people who are engaging with that quote content. And that's something we've never been able to do before. This is why paid is an important part of the equation here. It's not advertising. This is very small amounts of money by comparison to marketing. Believe me. Finally, analytics. Now, I hope your eyes don't roll up in your head here. I'm not talking about numbers, although I'm going to show you a bunch of numbers here. I'm not, look, Skylar interviewed me for a piece that's run somewhere here, and she asked about data in communications. And the first point I made to Skylar is data is often misunderstood, in my opinion, data is often misunderstood because you hear it. Well, let me ask you, when I say we got to use data in our communications work, what do you think I'm talking about? What do you think that means? Statistics about what?
Company, impressions.
Impressions, okay. Research, right? Yeah, actually, it usually falls in those two buckets when you say data. They say we need to do better research. In other words, we need to do focus groups. We need to survey people online. We need to know the audience, the market, the trends. Or two, we need to measure. Did it work? Did the campaign work? Are people's opinions changing? I really don't mean either of those things. I mean something more like dashboards. I mean something more like a pilot flying an airplane. You can't do research while you're flying an airplane, and you can't do measurement after the plane landed. You have to fly the plane. So if you're trying to reach people every day, every minute of every day. They're making decisions. They're buying things or not. They're feeling good about your company or not. Data is the lifeblood now. It's not passive. It's not numbers. It informs you of what's actually happening with people and in the world. And all these tools now are coming. And they're not expensive. In some cases, they're free so that we can actually know. What is happening in social media? What are people doing? Who are they? A lot of the social platforms themselves are equipping us with analytic tools because it encourages us to use them, which is causing its own set of issues. Now, that leads to kind of the final point, almost the final point I want to make with you about this. So social first communications is not the end game here. It was just my way at IBM to snap the organization out of old habits. You know, that's nice theory, John, but there's nothing like a Wall Street Journal article. Yeah, that Facebook stuff and the Snapchat thing, whatever it is, that's fun, but it's not the same. Well, no. It is a profound new reality. But it's not the only thing we need to master. And it's because of the phenomenon of data. So I would say to you that we all need to be cognitive communicators. Now, you'd say, well, I am cognitive because I'm a human being and I have a brain in my head. I just didn't know how to say it. We all have to figure out how to use artificial intelligence along with our own intelligence. We're going to have to use tools that today are called AI or digital intelligence, new tools to be at our service in order to do our jobs. And it's because of the phenomenon of data. Now, let me show you something here. You saw some ads for Watson. How many of you have heard of Watson as a technology? Okay, that makes me feel good. Well, it depends what you think Watson is. So let me give you a little backstory, then I'll show you a clip here. So most companies have R&D. IBM has R, and then we have D. R is like the University of Alabama. R is like MIT. R does fundamental scientific exploration. They don't do product development. And so in research laboratories around the world, you have scientists and researchers looking really into the future and trying to figure out what is going to be needed in the technology. They call these grand challenges. And around 2009, a couple of these scientists, they look like Mark Harris with the ponytail and stuff. They come over to corporate headquarters and they wanted a meeting with me. And they said, we think we have this next grand challenge and we want to talk to you about it because it may affect the brand and reputation of the company. You have my attention. Right? Well, what is this? And they said, we're going to build a computer, my words. They talked for like an hour and completely baffled me. We're going to build a computer that's going to play Jeopardy on national television. It's going to compete against the two greatest human champions, one the most money, and the other one won the most games, and that computer is going to beat them on live television. And I said, I got a lot of questions here, right? Starting with, why in the world would you want to build a computer to play Jeopardy? I mean, it's fun and all that, but it's a TV quiz show. It's not like chess or something. I mean, and what they explained to me, this is back in 2009, is the data that's exploding in the world, 80% of that data is called unstructured data. It's data like Facebook data. It's data like MRI images. It's data like conversations. People will be talking to computers. It may be digital. Computers can store it, move it around, protect it, process it, but they don't understand it. They don't actually understand the content of most of the world's data. So we need to build a system that can understand natural language and vague queries. And Jeopardy turns out to be a really, really hard problem for a computer. That's why I want to build this thing. It'll force us to advance the science. I said, oh, okay. Well, that's 2009. And in January of 2011, we're sitting at the research laboratory in New York, and we helped them call it, if you want the backstory, why did we call it Watson? Why does it have this particular voice? And it all matters. And let me just show you this if you did not see the match in 2011.
Brad, if you're ready, make your first choice.
Let's take alternate meanings for 200, Alex.
4-letter word for a vantage point or a belief. Brad.
What is a view?
We actually took the lead. We were ahead of them, but then we started getting some questions wrong.
Watson?
What is leg?
No, I'm sorry, I can't accept that.
What is 1920s?
No.
What is cheap?
No, sorry.
What is Sauron?
Sauron is right, and that puts you into a tie for the lead with Brad.
The Double Jeopardy round of the first game I thought was phenomenal.
Watson.
Who is Franz Liszt?
You are right.
What is violin?
Good.
Who is the church lady?
Yes. Watson.
What is narcolepsy?
You are right, and with that you move to $36,681.
Let's go to legal ease for 1200.
Watson.
What is executor?
Right.
Same category, 1600.
Answer. There you go.
That was the moment when I knew it's over.
The category is 19th century novelists.
What Watson wants to do then is preserve the lead, not take a big risk, especially with Final Jeopardy, because just like for humans, Final Jeopardy is hard for Watson.
Now we come to Watson, who is Bram Stoker, and the wager. Hello, 17,973, and a two-day total of 77,147.
Those exuberant people were the scientists, in case you figure that out. Yeah, it was, and it was a milestone. It was like Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic. It was a milestone in computer science to see that. And I share that with you because that's the backstory, but it transcends Watson. It transcends one company's product or technology. It's the age in which we operate. So trying to understand, remember that segmentation exercise we went through? How are we as companies or institutions going to pay attention to all the signals that you're throwing off every minute of the day? We can't have a department of people do that. How are we going to read everything you post, watch every video you share? How are we going to interpret the meaning of the thing so that whether you're, oh, that was just great. Oh, she really liked it. No, idiot, she hates it. Well, how does a computer know tonality? Well, we're going to need help because the humans aren't equipped to do all of that. This is the new era. Now, the Watson that you saw did one thing really well. It's called natural language question and answer. One thing, that's 2011. The Watson of today does more than 150 things. So one thing, 2011, 150 things today. The Watson of 2011 couldn't hear. So although it looked like Watson was listening, in fact, Alex Trebek's queries were being sent to him through text. The Watson of today can hear. In fact, the Watson of today can hear things you and I will never hear. We can't hear everything that animals can hear and so forth. The Watson of 2011 couldn't see anything. The Watson of today can see things you and I will never see, like infrared. The Watson of today never sleeps. And the Watson of today is fully instrumented, so everything that's happening is constantly going into Watson with these capabilities of, quote, hearing, of seeing, of reasoning, of understanding. One of the greatest breakthroughs wasn't a talking computer, was that every computer, classic computer, including all of the all the smart devices you have in your possession, or the big supercomputers and mainframes, they're all programmed. A programmer, a software engineer, a coder told that iPhone, told that mainframe what to do. Watson was not programmed. Watson learned. Watson was trained to learn. Profound breakthrough, profound advance. So you hear a lot about machine learning. You'll hear terms like this, machine learning or deep learning. This is a new era in computation of systems that aren't coded. They are coded to a degree to establish some foundational capabilities. After that, they learn through interaction and they learn through more data. Okay? So we have to sleep. We have to sleep. Companies can't stay on top of all this. Please do not interpret this as the needle in the haystack thing. That's not the right metaphor. Oh, there's all this data, we need to find the right insight. No, We need to keep listening and learning and understanding this very dynamic new world that's fully instrumented and all the data that's coming from mostly people. So a few examples, so this isn't like science fiction. So this is a snapshot of a center and a corporate headquarters at IBM, just a few paces from where I used to sit. It looks like mission control, and a lot of companies have these now, social listening and the sentiment on Twitter and all that kind of stuff. This is Watson driven though. So Watson's not only telling our colleagues here like number of comments and words and things like that or what's trending. Watson's understanding tonality, syntax, context. Watson's predicting if a trend is going to accelerate or diminish. And so a lot of those capabilities I showed you before are being applied here. And I would consider this to be very basic stuff. Let me give you another example. If you take a course in advertising, I hope they're teaching you about this term programmatic media. Yeah? What is that? Well, it's very complicated, but that's the point. So, like the stock market in the old days, what picture do you have in your head of the stock market from like 1950? The New York Stock Exchange 1950. What picture comes to your mind?
A bunch of guys waving paper around.
Bunch of guys waving paper around. Is that how stocks are traded today? No. In fact, if you go to the New York Stock Exchange and want to see the stock, it's like a movie set. It's just a little part of it left, mostly for CNBC to, for people to ring the bell. And they've got some people who are sitting around going, hey, hey, but they're not doing anything really. It's like a movie set. All of the trading is done by computers at high speed, high frequency trading. Take that model, guys going, hey, hey, and now look at the world of advertising. Oh, let's go down and talk to the department at Bass Angler magazine about an ad we're going to place there. Boy, that's Mad Men, right? Today, you just searched on something around a fishing rod on Google. I want to know that right now, and I want my ad to pop up immediately in your newsfeed. Because you said, I Googled a fishing rod or a fishing trip or something with fishing, and then I quickly abandoned it and went over here to look at my Facebook thing. I want my ad to appear in Facebook, even though they started with the Google search. Have you noticed, I know you have, that you start to search for something and suddenly it's like being stalked by that sweater or that product? Even though you left that site, it's following you around. Mad Men, advertising people are not sitting there watching you saying, oh, let's fire this ad to Mark. Well, it's like a stock trader. Hey, hey. No. High frequency trading. So what's happening here is unique pieces of content, call them ads, offers, discounts, information, are loaded up in these big libraries, and then they're firing off. They're firing off 24 hours a day at higher and higher speeds to target you. Based on what? Remember our segmentation exercise? No. What you just searched for, what you just tweeted, what you just posted. I'm graduating. Oh, my dad just retired. Does anybody know what a good HD TV is? Hey, I'm going to the Virgin Islands for spring break. Does anybody watch what happens? Humans are not doing that. Technology is doing that. Here's an example. So Saatchi & Saatchi is a great advertising agency, and they're like, we don't have enough copywriters to write all of the unique ads, variations of an ad to meet all the different people. Like a simple segmentation model says, let's write 7 different ads for this new Toyota car and then see if they respond to it. No, they wanted to write thousands of ads. So they go, well, we can't do that. Ken Watson. So the copywriters wrote 50 ads for this car. Watson learned. Like, well, what's a good ad? They trained Watson. A good ad gets these kinds of hits and reactions. Okay, well, based on that, can Watson write ads? Watson wrote thousands of ads. Let me read you a few. Remember, Watson learns, right? So Watson says, okay, I've written some ads. What do you think of them? Here's where the first ads he wrote. Yes, probably in this out we saw can I realized in college to cook applied into the. The copywriter said, bad Watson, that ad sucks. Watson's like, oh, why? Well, here's why. People don't talk like that. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Let me try again. Yes, the worried scientist's mother there. No. Watson was trained. Watson starts to learn. Watson started to write ads like this. This car is for fans of possibility. This car is approved by Mother Nature. This car will turn heads on the moon. Copywriters are like, pretty good. What's the point here? One, the new way of engaging requires unique content. We can't just take the one offer, the one message, and just blast it out through Facebook. Remember the huddle for warmth comment? This is like television, radio. We don't have to change anything. Yeah, you do have to change. You got to write 1 million unique things. You got to write 1 billion unique messages. You can't do that. I know you can't do that. That's why we have to figure out how to get some help here, and that's why the computer science is evolving the way it is. Here's another example, my last one. So you like football. How many of you like tennis? Okay, so this is the US Open tennis match. You know, Augusta National is going to have the Masters in a few days. Very similar, right? Like the Masters playing out over 4 or 5 days, the US Open plays over many days. If you're a fan of tennis, you don't want to just wait for the finals. You want to know the highlights from every match along the way. It's like any sport, right? Along the way, like what are the highlights? So you have I'm talking about television highlights, video highlights. So you got human editors. All these matches are playing on all these courts, and they can't watch all the matches, right? Nor can they wait till all the matches are done and then watch all of the games to pull out highlights. So they said, could Watson help us identify a highlight from a match? So Watson's like, well, what's a highlight? And they say, well, a highlight is something exciting is happening in a match. Well, like what? And they said, well, okay, one, statistically, this is like match point, or it's set point. Oh, okay, great. Is there anything else that could indicate a highlight? Yes, the fan noise in the stadium goes up. Watson says, I can listen for that. So when you hear the audio level of the stadium suddenly go way up, and it's in sync with a statistical moment, probability is very high that that's a highlight. Anything else? Yes, if a player does this or does that, it could be a highlight. Watson says, I can watch for that because I can see. I can hear, I can see, and I do math. So and they said, watch every game. Watch every game. And recommend to the human editors whether that's a highlight. What do you think happened? Did a pretty good job. Did a very good job. So I hope what we're taking away here is, remember how I started? I'm a little company, and I want you to buy my product, or I want you to work for me, or I want you to invest in my stock, or I'm a little university, I'd like you to consider coming here, or I'm a political party, I want you to vote for my candidate, or I'd like you to support my cause. Well, how do I reach you? Well, who are you? Well, I'll tell you who you are, or I'll go to people who, can tell me who you are, or I can master the new tools. You tell me who you are. You tell me what you're looking for, what you're interested in. And now this new world here is unfolding before our eyes, and we better gain mastery of it. And there's something else we need to better gain mastery of along with it too. Look, there's not a week that goes by. These headlines are already out of date. There is not a week that goes by when a celebrity, a public figure, an average person, a company doesn't have a headline like this. Isn't that true? In fact, if something happens in the world today, don't you expect it to be captured on video by somebody? It's almost astonishing when something happened that it's not recorded somewhere by some camera or some eyewitness. So it's amazing. Well, what's happening here? Well, what's happening here is the actual behavior of people and businesses and institutions are now available for everybody. Remember the many are influencing the many. And there's not a company that's not trying to understand how do we avoid getting a headline like this. You know what the answer is? You can't control this. What you can control is how you behave. So it's not putting out the fire after it happens. It's trying to do the right thing. And I'm not talking about not breaking the law, but if you stand for a kind of customer service, then do your best to provide that kind of customer service everywhere. If you stand for this inside your companies, treat your employees this way. By the way, I'm just curious. How many of you will look or have looked on Glassdoor before considering a company to work for? Okay. If you're going to go to a restaurant you've never been to before, how many of you would you look online for user-generated reviews for a restaurant? If you're going to take a trip and need to book a hotel somewhere or rent a house or something, how many of you would consult user-generated reviews before making that decision? How many of you consulted the equivalent of user-generated reviews in choosing to come to the University of Alabama? Okay. Look at this. Right. Did you respond to the ad that University of Alabama placed? Did you listen to a speech from a CEO of a company? No, you are responding to this very mechanism. So when an individual says to you, I don't care what they say about company X, I work at company X, this is a reality here. It could be great, it could be not great. Of course, this is just from the past week. We could talk about this if you want to. This is not limited to Facebook. I mean, Google and Twitter and all these other platforms are lying real low and letting Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, get hauled before Congress to take the blows, and they're just like, why? It's because their business model. Now, I for one think they're going to solve this if they change their business model and stop treating it like a public relations problem. But this is part of the new reality. Part of this, too, is how can this very same mechanisms that are good, you find value in social platforms, I take it. We want to use that to be more relevant to you as companies and institutions. We want to be relevant in the messages you get and the offers you get and so forth. And yet, the same platforms can be manipulated. So my own view is this is a maturation issue, that there will be a period in which this kind of snapback, these kinds of issues, will get debated and discussed as they should be, and then there will be adjustments made, one way or the other. I mean, this is part of the new reality too. You probably know this, right? That you can now manipulate video to make any person look like they've saying and doing almost anything. And so you say, well, I saw it on the internet, it must be true. It was captured on video. That person said that. And that person says, I never said that. And then you see something and they say, well, it was manipulated. Yeah, right. Well, actually, we're getting very close to that capability. So look, I ran across this quote from Abraham Lincoln some years ago, and I just can't find anything better to match it, to leave you with. And you can read it for yourself here. Unfortunately, too many in public relations, in public affairs, in lobbying, in marketing, in advertising, they think their profession and their job is to manipulate the shadow, the reputation, the brand, the image, the perception. And the best companies and the best clients you want to work for, the best institutions you want to tie up with, yeah, of course they want to have a great reputation, brand, image, perception. But the way they want to get that is by having a healthy tree. And Mark and I have been real fortunate to work for a company that, yeah, we cared about the headline and we cared that people heard about our research breakthrough, but they really wanted to be sure that we had a hand in and a role in defining authentically who we are, the character of a company, which is a different lecture. But in this time, when it's in the headlines, I hope we have a conversation about this. I'm dying to know whether you have abandoned Facebook, what you think about all of this. It's something that we have to address too. And it's an exciting period because it yields to another wave of leadership. Okay, so in the remaining time, I would really enjoy some observations and questions from you. Or I'll keep asking questions of you.
How do you prepare for your speaking engagements?
How do I prepare for my speaking engagements? I want to know as much as I can about who I'm speaking to. And I work backwards from there. And obviously, I'll be speaking to students, but that's not sufficient. I want to know why they've chosen to study what they study. I want to know where they are in their paths. I want to know what their biases are. I want to know what they know about me. I want to know what they don't know about me or my background. I don't know how else you prepare first, you know, and then you get started.
Could we lose jobs because of AI in the future? What would happen?
The answer is yes, but the answer is also there will be new ones created. So let me give you one here. Context. There are roughly 3 categories of concern about AI. One is jobs. Second one I would call control. And the third is ethics and empathy. Jobs. The pattern of history as it comes with technology is that, first of all, there are occupations and then there are jobs. So occupations would be doctor, nurse, engineer. The number of jobs go up and down, right? The pattern of history says that less than 10% of occupations are eliminated completely when a new technology comes in. Similarly, less than 10%, like 7 to 9%, new occupations are created that didn't exist before. But the thing that's most profound, I think, and often overlooked, is that all the other remaining occupations, new skills are required to keep doing them. So you take nursing or doctor, right? It hasn't changed in a very long time. But could you say that you could be a doctor or a nurse if your skill sets were the same as they were in 1910? No. My point here is you cannot be an engineer, a lawyer, a communicator, a CFO, a physician, if you don't have mastery over artificial intelligence for the same reason. There's not a profession in the world that is not going to have to, take advantage of this phenomenon of data. Did you see the movie Hidden Figures? Okay. At the beginning of that movie, that department of the women, what were their jobs called? They were computers. They were computers. What happened to the profession or the occupation of computer? It's gone, right? It's gone. What then happened in the movie toward the end? Somebody had to figure out how to program and run the new computers, the new mainframe, and jobs were created. So one observation I'll just end with here is the glimmers of a new occupation and profession starts this way. It starts with new tasks like this. Well, who's going to train Watson? What do you mean train Watson? Somebody has to sit there and tell Watson, that's a crappy ad and that's a good ad. You got to do that like 1,000 times. I got to do that? Yeah, that's a task. Well, you do it. You're free. All right. Well, then what happens? Well, there's someone who's good at that task and someone who's not so good at that task. We need somebody who's really good at that task. A task is becoming to be a role. Suddenly, we need 50 of those roles. You got to go hire people. And there's a non-standardization period, and then suddenly it becomes a real job. It becomes an occupation. And then you go into the future, and they're teaching it here at the University of Alabama, and you can get a degree in that. That usually takes about 30 years. 30 years. But it starts new tasks. And you know what? It's happening right now. Happening right now. You hear it. Who's going to train it? Who's curating the data? What's a data curator? Oh, you mean a database administrator? I do not mean a database administrator. Oh, you mean a data scientist? I don't even know what a data scientist is. I do not mean a data scientist. Oh, you mean an analytics person? I do not mean an analytics person. I mean a curator of data. And, oh, that's a task. My prediction, yeah, a couple of decades from now, you'll get a degree in data curation. Might call it something else. And they won't call it computer training, but they'll be like the equivalent of computer trainer as a real profession. And that's the rhythm of history when it comes to jobs.
Regarding Watson again,
Watson.
the way that they learn and interpret data, would you say that it's safe to say he has developed something of a personality?
The question is, based on how Watson learns and interprets data, has he developed a personality? I would say no. The advertising has created a brand persona for Watson of a kind of appealing geek, you know, which is good. I mean, we've done all kinds of, you know, testing of Watson as a brand, and he comes across as a humble genius, is the term most often described, and he's missing a little EQ. If you notice that in our ads, he's missing a little EQ. In other words, he's just like an IBMer, kind of nerdy and nice, but kind of, you know, socially awkward. So people find him non-threatening that way. That's personality. I think whether you meant to ask us or not, I'm going to say it. The real thing that's happening here with systems that are trained and that learn is like the rest of us. Who trained me and what did I learn? And that's going to set up my whole foundational view of the rest of my life. So here's another term that's beginning to emerge. Establishing ground truth. Establishing ground truth. So let me just ask you a few rhetorical questions, and we're out of time here. So the Watson for oncology, for cancer, was trained by the top oncologists at the top institutions in the United States. Good? Good. What if I told you they were all men, the average age was 58, and all of them went to the same 3 medical schools? Good? Okay. This is data curation. Which data sets will Watson ingest for healthcare recommendations? And how credible are those data sources for healthcare? Question. On a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being most credible, 1 being not credible. New England Journal of Medicine. Shout out a number. 10. Twitter. 2. Yes, but what if a Watson was being trained to identify the outbreak of a pandemic or epidemic? Twitter? 8. New England Journal of Medicine? 2. Somebody has to decide which doctors train to establish that worldview or that foundational or ground truth. Somebody has to decide. You will ingest Facebook, you will ingest the New York Times, you will ingest Fox News, you will ingest Wikipedia, or not, and that's a 10 or that's a 2 or a 0. Because after that, like you coming out of the University of Alabama, you're out in the world. When those scientists got through training Watson for Jeopardy, and I was a guinea pig, I played Watson, destroyed me, but I was part of the training regimen. They couldn't touch it anymore. And they said it was like sending your child off to school and you're sitting there and just praying that it does okay, because they couldn't touch it anymore. And Watson had to do his thing. So that personality is going to be shaped more from the data and the training and the experience that Watson or these systems have thereafter, more than anything else. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, hope that's not concerning to you. I'm just dying to ask you, can I ask you a few questions? I mean, just show of hand questions. Okay. How many of you have abandoned Facebook because of the recent controversy of the past, call it, month? You have got off of Facebook. Okay. How many of you have disabled cookies permanently? How many of you have geolocation turned off? How many of you, when you download a new app, do not allow it to access your contact list? Okay, you are a new generation. Because every time I'm in front of a group of younger folks, I ask these questions. 5 years ago, nobody turned off cookies. Nobody turned off geolocation. They wanted an app, they just scrolled down as fast as they could and said, yes, you're getting smarter. You may not have seen this. I ran by it pretty quickly. See the upper right? And I do think this is a role for the Planck Center and for the academic leaders and for business. Upper right here, you can Google that and go read it. Here's a nation, Italy, trying to teach its students, its young, principles of identifying credible and not credible news. And it's a pretty good list. And it's also teaching them not to perpetuate things that aren't validated and true. I learned that in journalism school like 100 years ago, right? Here they're teaching it to their nation, saying, has what you've read or seen been validated by another source? Have you seen it firsthand yourself before you share it? Stuff like that. I think that's all like really profound. And it relates back to the question of this new world, responsibility and trust and integrity. Okay.
Let's leave it there.
Let's leave it there. Thank you very much.